Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'm really excited to introduce our keynote speaker today, Miles Cooley. Built a standout career as an entertainment attorney in LA. His practice has included advising some of the biggest names in music, sports, and media that we have all heard of, navigating through the most complex and high-stake legal issues. He is someone who's seen the industry from just about every angle, whether it's helping launch a celebrity brand or navigating the behind-the-scenes business of entertainment. But what makes his story especially relevant to all of us today is that he is a proud double bear. And today he's going to talk about what it's been like to build a legal career in entertainment, how his time here at Berkeley shaped a path and influenced his approach. I'm probably share a few stories that we hadn't read about in the news. And with that, I'll hand over to Miles to share his story and experience.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much. And thanks to Ryan as well, and to the rest of the organizers of the Berkeley Law Sports and Entertainment Conference. I'm thrilled to be here. Of course, thanks to my beloved Berkeley. Go Bears. I really love that you've invited me to do this. So a bit about me. I graduated from Berkeley undergrad in 1992. And then from this fantastic law school in 1999, with 2 years in the Peace Corps in Ecuador in between. I had a great experience at Berkeley Law. It was incomparable in terms of my development, my growth, obviously, as a lawyer, but more importantly, as a person. I won best oral argument my first year of moot court. I was elected to the moot court board my second year, and I competed in numerous moot court competitions during my law school years, concluding with the McBain moot court competition, where I won best brief. So I'm not trying to brag about myself, except to say all of this was a really good training grounds for a future lawyer, and particularly a future litigator. After law school, I practiced for a year in San Francisco and moved to LA, where I've been for about 25 years now. And I worked mostly in major law firms, my last being DLA Piper, where I was a senior partner there. And interestingly, it was within major law firms that I developed, sort of by accident, the niche practice of doing talent side entertainment work. We had just acquired a firm, a smaller entertainment firm, and there was a gentleman who was a much more senior lawyer from Brooklyn, and he called me up and he said, "Kid, I got something for you might be interested in." And I'm probably a second or third year lawyer by now. And he calls me into his office, and this guy knows more about the music business than in his pink, has more knowledge about the music business in his pinky than I will ever have. Starts telling me a story about there was some altercation on the set of a music video. There was some rapper kid that you may know, but I don't know. But would you want to take the case? And I was interested. I like hip hop, so I was like, sure. It ended up being the music video was In the Club by 50 Cent, and it was handling a litigation for him. His bodyguards, I guess, had gotten in a scuffle. And that really began inside of a major law firm, my experience doing, talent side entertainment work, which isn't typical for big law firms, particularly. And from there, I started off doing some very sort of basic litigation case for a woman named Robin Fenty, who most of you know as Rihanna. And I was able to parlay that into a general counsel role, which I did for 5 years for her, which was fantastic. She's fantastic. It was I was basically her outside general counsel, and it was a wild and fun ride. I got to do a lot of really world-class and cutting-edge things, and certainly learned a lot, being the tip of her legal spear. And then from there, I continued to do talent-side legal work while under the aegis of big law firms for many years. I've represented actors, producers, all kinds of entertainers in the music space, sports teams, sports agents, agencies, production companies. So I've done a lot of work, kind of full spectrum around the entertainment business, but mostly dealing with talent or talent adjacent enterprises. In 2020, I was recruited out of DLA Piper to a client, an entertainer client, who had just sold his music publishing catalog for a big number. And he wanted me to help him develop some business verticals. And one of them was a very large real estate project in Hollywood, which hopefully at the beginning of the third quarter of this year is going to get through entitlements. I'm still a participant in that project. Super exciting. I got a crash course in architecture and in commercial real estate development, which I hadn't had before, which was really interesting. And it was cool to be in-house and really sort of look at the entertainment world from inside of an enterprise as opposed to being an outside lawyer supporting them. And currently, I am a named partner at the boutique firm of Liner, Freedman, Taitelman, and Cooley. Obviously, I'm the Cooley. It's a boutique firm here in LA that does primarily entertainment litigation. We practice entertainment, sports, and the media space I think at a fairly high level, I'm proud to say. One of our bigger cases at the moment is representing a guy named Justin Baldoni and his dispute with a well-known actress. Some of you may have seen that in the news a little bit lately. Anyway, I've had a great career, and I've had really been lucky to experience the breadth of kind of what the entertainment business has to offer from a lot of different vantage points. So that's a little bit about my background. When Ryan and Sarah approached me, and when the journal approached me to give a talk, I was obviously honored by the ask and thrilled at the opportunity, but I was struggling a little bit trying to figure out what I was going to talk about because, I thought to myself, well, I could talk about AI because that's kind of a hot thing right now. And then I realized that AI was on the cover of the Berkeley Law magazine, and you guys already have a panel set up for that and with really smart people to talk about that. And then I thought maybe I could talk about celebrity endorsement deals because I've done a fair amount of those. And then I saw Matt Thompson, who's one of the best entertainment transactional guys in LA, was already signed up to talk about it. And you had a great panel on that topic. And then I thought, well, what about this other issue of like NIL and the crazy stuff that's going on in the conferences? And I cry all the time about the loss of the Pac-10. And then, of course, you have another rock star panel in the conference talking about those issues. So I was foiled at every turn by Berkeley Law being at the center of things that are important and timely. And so great for the conference, bad for me. And then it dawned on me, maybe what I can do is I can just talk about my journey, my experience in entertainment law for the last quarter century since I left Berkeley Law, and talk about what it's been like for me to practice in entertainment in Los Angeles. And then I thought, well, wait a second, maybe I could just talk about the thing, sort of the values I picked up along the way. And as I was thinking about those values, I realized that a lot of the values or the things that I've learned were lessons that I learned at Berkeley. Were very distinct things that I think fundamentally helped shape my career path. That in the sense that the values that I have or the lessons that I think I've learned are really synonymous with the values I learned at Berkeley, if that makes sense. And really they're fundamental things that I learned at Berkeley, both as an undergrad, but mostly in law school, that are really fundamental to what I consider to be a pretty successful career so far. And I've distilled them down to kind of 6 sort of specific concepts. 1 is work hard. 2 is be excellent. 3 is teams win. 4 is stay determined. 5 is laugh hard. And 6 is a little more obscure. It's fiat lux, which I'll describe sort of how I interpret that. So working hard. I mean, obviously it's, I'm not going to give a keynote on working hard as a topic, because everybody knows if you go to law school and then you're going to go on to be a lawyer, you're going to have to work hard. But fundamentally, I think I learned, at Berkeley, sort of the stamina, both intellectual stamina and physical stamina you need for the profession. It was sort of inculcated and trained into me while I was there. I don't think I had worked as hard as I did previously, academically or any other thing, until I was at Berkeley. And as a lawyer, I certainly don't want to discourage any of you, nascent lawyers, but it's a really demanding gig. When you get paid by the hour, like most of us do, you end up clocking a lot of hours. And even though my name is on the door in my firm, I regularly bill over, well over 200 hours a month. So there's a lot of work to do. And there's really no other way to say it. Working hard is essential to a successful career. At least it's been mine. And it's been a lot of hard work. Nothing has been particularly easy. But law school really prepared me. Law school at Berkeley Law really prepared me. And even though I didn't realize it at the time, a lot of the pedagogy, a lot of the things that you have to work through in law school to develop your intellectual sort of horsepower and ability to continue to work through tough problems, I obviously learned at Berkeley. The steep learning curve the first year, the long study groups, the intense cramming ahead of finals, perfecting your course outlines for finals, all of the practice that you had to do for the Moot Court board and Moot Court and competitions and the McBain competition, all of that stuff, all of that work, all of that, output really is conditioning for what you go on to do in your sort of broader law career. And I think for the McBain competition, my brief was like 25 pages. I don't think I'd ever written anything so long, as long as that in my life. And of course, we do that regularly. I do that regularly over the course of my career, and certainly do it now. And so the hard work and training that you put in, and the training you get at Berkeley is really the thing that helps you go forth and sustain a career, even though, probably at the time I didn't realize that's exactly what I was getting trained for. Doing the summary judgment brief that I have to submit now is a lot like making sure I can get the McBain brief just right, or the study outline just right, pulling the all-nighters, juggling multiple classes, dealing with professors, fellow students, and, the school bureaucracy. It's really all training, exercising a future career muscle, for, getting things done in your career. It's not different from juggling multiple cases, pulling all-nighters as a young associate, dealing with judges and colleagues and court administrators. So it's all very similar. And there's really been a direct connection to the hard work I put into my career to all the work that I did here, or, I did at Berkeley Law. And so it really translated for me, and I'm sure it will transfer for you as well. A close corollary to the hard work sort of lesson, or sort of value, is be excellent. I don't think you can be excellent unless you put in the hard work. There's something about Berkeley Law that I felt when I was there, and really even being an undergrad on lower campus, there's sort of a by osmosis even, this desire to be excellent. Excellence is all around you at Berkeley. It's just the environment at Cal, and on lower campus, but particularly at the law school. And it's the Nobel laureates, and it's the history-making professors and thinkers and thought leaders, and the cutting edge and pioneering intellects that have walked those halls and taught those classes. And that really is just sort of permeates. And, when I was in law school, it was very often that the professors that we studied, with, or that were teaching us, wrote the case book, wrote the notebook, wrote the course book. And so, the idea that the teacher that's teaching you wrote the textbook you're studying, that the other students around the country also study from, is pretty amazing. And so, that, and the other thing too that's interesting was all the clinics, where you'd have cutting edge clinics on cutting edge legal issues, where literally policymakers that ultimately went on to Washington and served in administrations, and or were coming back from having served in Washington and in administrations. Those were your professors, those were your teachers. So excellence was everywhere. It felt like excellence was hitting me from every angle, and particularly the excellence of my fellow classmates. Just the idea that, of course, it's a really difficult place to get into in the first place, but then the academic rigor and the competition that the experience of being at Berkeley Law sort of created for me. Again, it was an analog and a preparation for what I will ultimately do in my career now, as a lawyer, where we always try to be excellent. There's a lot of pressure on lawyers to win all the time. We have to win for our clients, for our colleagues, and our careers depend on it. And so I've chosen to take the pressure to be excellent and use that as a fuel, that pressure to win all the time. And I take pride, as do the team of lawyers that I lead at my firm. We all take pride, and my partners, we all take pride in really trying to be excellent all the time. And that's why it's so, you got to put in time to do that. You got to go the extra mile. One of my partners said, and it's two sides of the same coin. He says, I hate to lose. And I say it differently. I'd say I'd love to win, but it's really the same thing. And it requires a commitment, right? And that commitment and that motivation about, trying to be excellent and really pursuing that and getting the desire to do that, I learned that at Berkeley, and it served me well, in my career. The other thing I love about being a student at Cal, both undergrad, but more specifically and acutely at Berkeley Law, was working in teams. The other theory, the other lesson or value is that teams win. And I learned how to work collaboratively at Berkeley, in small groups, study groups, working on sharing course outlines, group projects, clinics, moot court partners, all of these collaborative settings where you have to work together as a team to win or to succeed as a project, in a project or in a particular outcome. I really got a lot of good practice with that. And lawyering is nothing if it's not a team sport. It takes a village. It takes a group of people typically to win. It's hard to do it on your own. I would hate to do it on my own. And some of my favorite experiences in law school were working collaboratively in these groups, particularly around moot court. And except for one ill-fated trip to Portland where we got our butts kicked in the first round, primarily those experiences working in teams, ended up being pretty winning and pretty successful. And it's been, the truth has been said for me professionally. Some of my most sort of important and memorable experiences in my career have been working on trial teams, for example, where everyone's gearing up to go to trial. And it feels like you're gearing up to go to battle, which in a way it is. And everyone's rowing in the same direction. Everyone's looking at each other, not wanting to let each other down. Everyone's trying to perform at the highest level they possibly can, all for the same objective, something bigger than yourself, to get a win for the client. It's an incredible feeling. And to be a part of a well-oiled machine, to put the time in, to put the work in, to be an effective trial team and then come out with a win is, it's, analogous to sports teams and other things I participated in that sense. But it's been super rewarding in my career, and really learning how to do that at a relatively high level. I really learned while I was a student at Berkeley Law. And I think if one thing to really keep in mind that I've learned, or that I realized pretty quickly, is that a team is a team, and that includes everybody, including the support staff. And always treat your support staff well. The difference between winning and losing can sometimes be that esprit de corps that you have with your whole team, which includes all the different people that go into whatever the win is. Getting the paralegal to stay late to, your rock star paralegal to help you make sure all the trial binders are together, or that your assistant is staying late to make sure all the trial subpoenas go out and doesn't make a mistake. And, you're trying to get all, your cross-examination together and you don't want to make a mistake. It's the whole team. And, as I think the value that I sort of learned and was inculcated at Berkeley, it really is the whole team, and that team, teams win championships, as they say. And when they're really a team, they're truly a team, they win. The next thing that I think was something that a value that I learned at Berkeley was stay determined. I remember being very disappointed my first semester at Berkeley Law and getting all P's. I'm not sure what the grading system is now, but there was a pass, there was an honors, there was a high honors, and getting only the passes, which they would try and tell us it's like a B or something, but it was still disappointing. And I got all P's my first semester, and I did well in moot court, but I was still disappointed. But I stayed determined, and I did office hours with my professors. I went over my exams. I tried to diagnose and do a post-mortem on what happened, and got some good feedback. And eventually, because I stayed determined, that started to turn around, and I started to see some H's and double H's even, and even Andrew at a class. But it was only because I stayed determined and wanted to stay after it. And those kinds of things. And it wasn't just even the substantive stuff. It was also staying determined dealing with the bureaucracy, like the larger bureaucracy of being in law school and getting financial aid and getting housing and getting, registered for your classes and all the different things it takes to be in law school. That too required a lot of determination. But, again, was sort of subconscious training. I mean, the institution may understand what they're doing, but I certainly, as a law student going through it, didn't know that all of that determination would reap dividends later in my career, because it's crucial in the law business to stay determined. You can lose at the trial level and file an appeal and win in the Court of Appeal, which I've done recently on a dispositive motion that I lost that got overturned in a scathing Court of Appeal ruling against the defendant. And you just got to stay after it. You got to stay after particular legal problems that are vexing to you, and try and solve them, and stay determined to do that. You've got to stay after cases, and when you can have a bad thing happen in a matter that isn't helpful for your client's case, but if you work hard enough and you stay after it and you stay determined, you can turn that around and turn it into something viable for an eventual successful outcome. So that determination that you have to build to go through law school, I think it's part of the process of law school, I'm sure, but I feel like the inculcation of that value of determination, I think, really was instilled in me at Berkeley Law. The second to last sort of value that I think I felt a lot at Berkeley, that I think is just a crucial thing to have in life in general, is to laugh hard. Meaning, have fun with what you do. Don't take it all too seriously. You win some, you lose some. Obviously, you always want to win. And really, have some humility about yourself. Don't take yourself too seriously. Sometimes when you laugh hard, you got to laugh hard at yourself, even for mistakes you make or whatever. I mean, I remember being at Berkeley, and the sense of humor that sort of was a part of, we would have, I don't know if you still do some of these rituals, but there would be, a day, I think a couple of weeks before finals, when they'd roll a keg in, and they'd have all kinds of talent shows, and we had Zeb, where you could read about funny things that Professor Bering would put in this kind of in the school paper, sort of, that was out there. Just a lot of humor among the students. Everybody was feeling a lot of pressure, particularly in first year, but there were really great ways in which we built into that was built into the culture of Berkeley Law, about letting off the pressure, having pressure valves where you could let off some of the steam. And we do that in our firm. We have, we do a lot of we have a lot of fun. And sometimes, even if it's gallows humor, there's a lot of humor in what we do. And it's really been an important part of the profession, which is a certain kind of collegiality, a certain kind of joie de vivre, bringing a certain, a sense of humor reflects, in my view, a healthy, legal mind, in the sense that you can sort of make fun of what's going on, not only to you, but stuff you've done that is worthy of being laughed at. And, that sense of humor and laughing hard, even when things are going tough, has been a really important part. And certainly that was a value that was reinforced at Berkeley. And I think the last thing, and maybe the most important thing, and it's sort of the most obscure thing, at least, is just Latin. It's fiat lux, which is, some folks might know that's the slogan for the University of California system, and it roughly translates to "Let there be light." And I think it's been interpreted or sort of viewed as talking about the light of knowledge, that Berkeley and the University of California system is sort of this beacon of knowledge that will sort of cast light around the world. And as an undergrad there, I was really attracted to that as an idea, and really, loved the idea of knowledge and truth, being light, for the world. And I think part of how I've looked at it as applied to an individual person is sort of take it as a mandate to shine your light, to stand in your power, to be a light, to be a bright light, in terms of what you bring to the practice of law, what you bring to your, to broader society, what you bring to your own community. And that, to me, includes, speaking truth to power, standing up for folks that need to be stood up for, and really being active and being a participant in sort of a broader civil society. And to me, one of the most valuable things as a lawyer, being empowered to reflect, the values I've talked about, but also to really use the law as a force of good, to use the law and sort of shine the light of the law, and to look for the truth in our profession as lawyers, all that to me is sort of wrapped up in, how we're going to go out into the world and be lawyers, and how we're going to fight for truth. Truth to me is super connected to justice. And so, not to get political, but, I feel like in times like these, law firms are being attacked. There's, issues about the Constitution, which of course we all as lawyers know and revere, or should. Um, Now is the time to really care about those issues and really be, that light, and really stand in your power as a lawyer. I've done pro bono and sort of used that sort of value to motivate me to be involved in pro bono and be involved in all kinds of efforts designed to uplift people that need uplifting in our society. And I think it's an important pillar of being a lawyer, certainly in California, but also more broadly in the country at the moment. And it's really been an important part of my career. I ran pro bono for big law firms, or at least been the partner or sort of responsible person for that. I still do a lot of pro bono, and certainly think now is a time for all of us as lawyers to think about how we can be active in shining a light and standing up, speaking truth to power and standing up for what's right. And Berkeley, of course, to me, really represents that, and really represents an institution that has done that for, now, more than 100 years. So those are the values. Those are the things I think that I've gotten from my experience at Berkeley Law that have really guided my career, and that, there's a really interesting sort of consonance of the things that I think have helped me, or the lessons I've learned, and sort of now I've realized, and thinking about it to talk to you today, that it all came from my experience at Berkeley. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. I know Ryan and Sarah have some questions, and so I think now's a great time, if it works for them, to dive into those.
Yes, thank you, Miles. Thoughtful and inspiring remarks. Our audience today is full of students and young lawyers that are interested in working in entertainment and sports. Like you said, Sarah and I have prepared a few questions for you to delve deeper into your career path, and then also the lessons that you took with you from Berkeley. So we can jump right in. You've had a dynamic career as a litigator across industries, and of course, particularly in entertainment. What first drew you to the law, and did that motivation evolve during your time at Berkeley?
I was one of these weird kids who had a sense of a path when I was probably 7 or 8 years old. And in order, I wanted to go to Berkeley, go to the Peace Corps, because I thought it sounded like the coolest thing to get to go to some far off country and work for a couple of years and learn the language and help people, and then come back from that experience and go to law school. And luckily, that's exactly what I did. And so now, did I know why I wanted to go to law school exactly? Did I know, what was motivating me? Probably not. I certainly didn't want to go to law school because I thought I wanted to be an entertainment lawyer, worrying about, what clothes a celebrity could wear to a particular opening. That certainly wasn't what I was thinking. I probably was more motivated for broader ideas of justice, broader ideas of, making a difference sort of in other ways. So look, I didn't take a single entertainment class at Berkeley. I don't even know that I paid much attention to it. And that's why I said it was sort of accidental that I got called into this partner's office and ended up down on this road. I'm really happy I did. I think I've gotten a lot out of it, and I think I've been able to, do good work for a lot of folks. But I can't say that I was motivated by entertainment at all. I was more motivated, I think, by the larger sense of being a part of a justice system, or being a part of, of what we do as lawyers, just sort of as a worldview, and as a source of contribution.
Mhm. You spoke about some of the high-profile clients that you have that trust you with their business. Was there anything about Berkeley Law's culture or curriculum that prepared you for representing public figures in particular?
I mean, in addition to the things that I just said, I mean, look, I think I'll just make this distinction. I mean, I think clients are clients in many respects. They want the same things. They want a good outcome. They're coming to you with a problem, sometimes a major problem, life-changing type problems. A lot of what I do is crisis management. A lot of what I do is pre-litigation counseling to solve problems before they are ever public, or before they are ever filed, or there's ever an issue that leads to litigation, really. And so I think the values that I just talked about are really important in that. Um, I like what I do because I'm, rightly or wrongly, I'm often at the center where the action is. And to be honest, I think one of the things I didn't say, but I might have alluded to in my remarks, is that Berkeley puts itself in the center of the action. And you can just thumb through, and I do it whenever, once a quarter or whenever we get it, you thumb through the Berkeley magazine, and it's always super topical and very often even predictive, meaning they're anticipating what's going on well ahead of the curve, or what's going to happen. And so, I think representing clients is something that Berkeley taught me how to do. Being at the center of the action, where a lot of my clients' business happens to be, is just something that you're a part of when you're at Berkeley. It's something that just sort of is, I don't know if it's through osmosis or whatever. It's just something that I felt like I was, let me put it this way. And this is not about some shortages. I'm not, it's not about self-regard. It's Berkeley kind of trains you to be able to be at the center of the action. I hope that explains it.
Sure. Yeah. Continuing like with your early career, after leaving Berkeley, then moving into practice in San Francisco, and then eventually in LA, did your understanding of the legal profession change at all as you became more experienced?
Well, I mean, it's night and day, right? It's sort of like what I was describing about being a first year and getting all P's and then starting to figure it out. There's a steep learning curve, and that learning curve, and actually, it's good that you bring it up, because I would say the learning curve of law school is also the learning curve of practice. So I win the McBain Best Brief, and I think I'm a pretty hotshot writer. My first memo that I ever did, and as a lawyer in practice, was so filled with red ink that I couldn't even read the words on the page. And I was, coming there thinking that I knew what I was doing because I could write a brief about the First Amendment or whatever it was. And so, the reality is there's a difference between what you learn I think Berkeley is evolved in a way that where there's a lot more clinics and practical things that you learn in ways that maybe it was, in the old timey days when I was there, it was a little more jurisprudential, right? But I mean, it was night and day in terms of what I was learning and thinking about. Like, you learn how to think like a lawyer, right? But you know how to spot issues, and you know how to research the law and apply the law. But you certainly don't know what it is to be a practicing lawyer every day. And it's probably a little different now, given what I've learned, and I've come back to campus and seen all the practical stuff that you guys do. But it was hard. It was hard to and it's not just the long hours. It's the vigor you need and the curiosity you need to maintain to get to the right answer. And so there's a lot of work that you don't really know how to do when you first get going, and you learn and you stay determined, and you stay after it, and eventually you get it. So really, there's a lot you learn. And then culturally, I think the bar up in San Francisco is different than Los Angeles. I think it's way more dynamic down here in terms of a lot more industries, obviously the entertainment industry. And it's sort of like the Wild West sometimes when you're strolling through the halls of Superior Court in downtown LA. There's a lot going on, right? And not that San Francisco doesn't have a dynamism of its own, but I think you see things a little differently down here than I did as a very young lawyer in San Francisco, for that reason too.
You spoke about, hard work, staying determined, and the qualities needed to be a successful attorney. Could you speak more to some early challenges that you might have faced, like breaking into entertainment and high-profile work?
So talent sometimes, they have their own weather. the entertainment business has its own weather. I mean, it's a very unique industry, and particularly when you're on the talent side, it's far less corporate. Although a lot of really talented, smart talent, they run their operations like a business, and they're very corporate. Others don't. And so there are challenges sometimes built into representing talent, which is, and it could be talent, it could be high net worth people, it could be businesses. I mean, you deal with people, and it's a people business. And so there's a lot of pressure on talent. There's a lot of obviously public facing exposure, as you alluded to before, right? That, you're a public figure. That's real different than a lot of clients. And so it adds a lot of pressure, right? And I think not only to them, but also to the lawyer advising them, right? In terms of certain of the stakes, maybe. But I think, again, I go back to the statement that I think, entertainers and athletes are just like any other client, in the sense that they don't want to pay you, too much. They want to get a great outcome. They want to be communicated with. They want to feel safe. And so, that's been my experience, that because of what they do makes them different. Fundamentally, you deliver the same kind of results to them as you do other clients, except that there's this public facing component, which makes it sometimes different. Although, I've represented, sports franchises, which are very well run, that also have a public facing issue. So it doesn't always have to be that because they're an individual artist or something. It's really just the industry they're in, I think. I'd have a different set of challenges representing Disney. I'd have a different set of challenges representing Ford Motor Company, based on the industries and sort of where they're positioned in the marketplace. But overall, clients want you to win, and they want it to be cost effective. That's what I found.
You mentioned earlier your experience drafting your first brief and how it was super heavily redlined. Can you talk about a moment in your career where you leaned directly on something that you learned or experienced at Berkeley?
I mean, I think some of the most memorable experiences I had as a law student were working in groups. And that was, the human rights clinic that we did, where we did a group project. It was semester long. It was various moot court competitions that I did, where I had a partner. Various partners that were, excellent and smart and driven and, amazing. So, and being part of the moot court board and administering first year moot court, and sort of working with the administrative team to do that. We protested. It was the middle of a big turbulent time for race relations, and there was a thing called Proposition 209. It seems kind of quaint now, given everything that's going on, but we marched and protested and shut down the registrar's office and got arrested. And there was a group of students that participated in that, and I was one. And it was strange that we planned the takeover for the afternoon, but we had on-campus interviews in the morning. So I had my little blue suit on to go down and get a job, and to the interviews down. They used to do it down at the Hotel Durant, or no, the Bancroft, one of the hotels. And I had to go change my suit in my car so I could go get arrested. But again, it was a team experience. And so I would say that the things that I've directly pulled from at Berkeley are the same sorts of, the team experiences I have as a lawyer, leading teams. As a general counsel for Rihanna, I ran, worldwide team, of lawyers. As a named partner at my firm, I help run the firm, and then I've got trial teams that sometimes it's me and a paralegal, sometimes it's a team of 5. And being in those group settings and really connecting as a unified group, going out to do something bigger than yourself. It's that training and those positive experiences I had at Berkeley Law really translate, I think.
Yeah, you've alluded to this already, but how do you think Berkeley or a Berkeley legal education differs in any way from other top law schools, and how it prepares its students for the real world?
Aren't we the top law school? Are there any other real top law? No, no. I mean, look, I I've had the opportunity to meet people from all different great law schools, around the country, and I've spoken at a few and talked to professors and colleagues in the legal profession who are from a bunch of different law schools. Some top, some not quite, top, and I would say that each probably offers their own sort of unique thing. Because Berkeley is mine, I take great pride, and I think of it as the best. It certainly was the best for me. When I applied to law school, it was in a go-go time it was when the legal industry was taking off, probably before you were born. And it's different now. But I got an opportunity to, effectively, go visit lots of law schools. I was lucky. And I'm so glad I chose Berkeley. I think it is unique. I think it's unique because it's public. I think it's unique because its charge is for all Californians and for the world. I think it's unique because it has a history of speaking truth to power. It has a history, at least the undergrad campus, but I also know that during that, the Students for Democratic Society period, a lot of the law students were involved too. So it's a very special place. It's got the best view of any law school in the world, in my view. That view down over the bay to the Golden Gate. It's like, I'm just disappointed there's no more Pac-12, but I like watching the games now. There's more games on TV, which is good. But I really, everybody's going to have their own view of law school. Everybody's going to have their own view of their own law school. But literally, even when I was going through it, I knew I was having some of the best times of my life.
This next question is more personal, and it's about your work. You've talked about representing artists like Rihanna, and then also working with sports teams in litigation. What's the key difference between representing these types of clients, and do you have a preference for either?
I love all my clients, Ryan, and if you learn anything from this talk, learn that phrase. No, look, each offered something really different. I had an opportunity to represent the Chargers, and I had an opportunity to represent the Clippers, and kind of shows my predilection for LA teams, like the teams I like. But and then when I was at DLA, we also represented the Rams, but they're great organizations. I happen to be a Bay Area sports fan, so I'm a Niners, Giants, Warriors guy. But sports teams, man, I mean, talk about be excellent. Their whole thing is being excellent. And one of the sports law conferences that was in person, maybe it feels like maybe even 10 years ago now, Andre Iguodala was there, and I got to meet him, and I still have a picture somewhere with my framed picture with my son shaking his hand. My son was like an infant. I love sports teams. I love what they do. I love what they do for the community. I love who they are, in the hearts of a fan. As a lawyer, you have a different set of issues. Some of them are similar, like I said, because they're very public and very outward facing by nature. And so there's different risk profiles, but they overlap in some ways with talent. Fundamentally, I love representing clients and solving problems. And so that disposition is super helpful, regardless of who the client is and regardless of what industry they're in. And there's a lot more sort of corporate things to think about when you're dealing with a sports team, a sports franchise, than there are often with, very often what I've done as an outside general counsel is helped sort of institutionalize and corporatize, routinize the business life of an artist. And that's really fun. It's challenging. Very often, they don't need that from me, right? The sports teams, they don't need that from me. What they need is mitigating risks, solving problems, keeping everything great with the public. And the GCs that I worked with in both the Chargers and the Clippers were super bright, amazing people. Women, actually, they were beautiful, wonderful, talented people. And it was empowering to work with them.
You spoke about your role like as an attorney for your clients, but also as a business advisor. How does business development differ in entertainment versus other commercial clients or areas?
That's a really good question. That's a really smart question if you're thinking about the business of law, right? Which is something that I wish I'd probably gotten more of. Under really understanding the business of law, right? How do you get clients? How do you keep clients? How do you do your accounting? What do you know? Um, all that stuff is really important. When you run a law firm, you're really running a medium-sized, small and medium-sized business, right?
Mm.
And there's a lot of training that you don't necessarily have, you just don't necessarily get. And so business development is a really important part of the whole thing, right? You need to get the clients to keep the lights on and to eat. Much of what happens in entertainment is driven by word of mouth, I think, by reputation, I think. And I think that, I've been lucky to have a pretty good run of, knock on wood, a pretty good run and of good outcomes. And I think that sort of generates momentum to get, other clients. So it doesn't hurt to be, a top news story day after day too, in terms of being in the news and the cases that, we have a lot of high profile cases. And so, you're able to achieve something that, Deadline reports on, or Variety or Hollywood Reporter or Pitchfork or or Complex, or Sports Illustrated or Barstool. You're known and you're seen, and when you do a lot of that, it helps.
What would be your word of advice for students here at Berkeley and those watching online that are interested in pursuing entertainment or a non-traditional career, sort of like yours?
I would say, the things that I talked about the sort of core values that I got out of, see if those values resonate with you.
Mm-hmm.
Think about those values and keep your antenna up for the experiences and things that go on at Berkeley that could reinforce those if they resonate with you. The other thing I'd say is be relatively fearless about sort of diving in. Like I said, I didn't take a single entertainment class at Cal, Berkeley Law. I dove right into entertainment law, even though I hadn't done it for I'd practicing for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years before I got the 50 Cent thing. I ended up doing sort of litigation for him, around the country as a very young lawyer. And I was sort of fearless about it and excited about it and ambitious to sort of dive in and really, a lot of it, of course, was just the Code of Civil Procedure and continuing to do what I'd done as a civil litigator. But, it was also, like you indicated, an exposure to a different kind of client with different kinds of things to think about, right, as a lawyer. And so I would just say, be as fearless as you possibly can, but not foolish, dive in and if you have the opportunity, really, keep your antenna up for those opportunities. I think entertainment law requires a lot of different muscles, and it's really an interesting practice. I mean, I've really enjoyed it. And I think that, I love artists. I love art of most forms. And so being able to solve problems for artists, that protect artists, and to mitigate risk for artists, I think is a high value. I'm not saying that doing it for a big Fortune 50 company isn't also a high value. I'm just saying for me, it's pretty rewarding. And in some cases, the artist hasn't been treated well by it's a capital labor type of situation, and the labor got exploited. And, there's a certain sense of justice there to be able to advocate for that artist to help set things straight. And so for me, there is an element of, there's a justice element to it, right? That I like. And again, it's not to take anything away from people who represent big corporations. Corporations need great lawyers too, and deserve them. But for me personally, it's been really rewarding to help, a young rapper, for example, who's gotten a horrible management deal, to orchestrate, figure out, and problem solve to get him out of his management deal, and and allow him to continue to go record music. He was basically in a purgatory where he couldn't really record. It was a bad deal. Whatever he recorded was going to go to the manager. I was able to help him, all quiet, all confidential, through a mediation, and solved it. So it's those kinds of things.
Well, thank you so much again for being here today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share as we close out?
No, I really I'm really honored and flattered that you would want to have me talk, and I hope it was interesting. Please, if you want to email me, anybody has any questions or thoughts, I'm a really happy mentor, or a really happy, phone call if anybody has anything they want to talk about further. And thank you for the journal for putting it on, and thank you for doing such a great job, you and Sarah and Justin of BCLT, who was running the tech. And go Bears.
Go Bears.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.